the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
The late Glenn Ford taught me to always begin remarks with those words. I want to thank the organizers, thank Chuck Zlatkin and others for once again bringing us all together and for inviting me to participate. I'm always ready to defend Julian Assange. I am a proud contributor of the book In Defense of Julian Assange, or books published. If you haven't read it, you should. And I think Chuck made reference to the initial negative reactions to any defense of Assange. And that's because of the war propaganda that was waged against him. We were told that Donald Trump won because of Julian Assange, that he was working with Russia, and they hacked the emails from the Democratic National Committee, none of which is true. Those materials were leaked to Julian Assange. There's ample evidence that that is the case. But in any case, what is so wonderful about the Democratic Party? It is Barack Obama, after all, who began the process of prosecuting whistleblowers using the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act goes back to the days of Woodrow Wilson, the Palmer raids. No one, no president, it's great speaking in New York City, no president used the Espionage Act as much as Obama. If you combined all the presidents before him, none of them used the Espionage Act like Obama did. Now they chose not to touch Assange, not to try to prosecute him, to allow him to languish in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but Donald Trump decided to get him. And how did they get him? They interfered in the domestic activities of the nation of Ecuador. Ecuador had given him asylum, and that meant they needed a new government in Ecuador. So the Trump administration set out to do what the U.S. has done many times, to interfere in Ecuador's electoral politics and get different people in office who would give Assange up. Now, what are we told about Donald Trump? Well, we shouldn't be surprised, right? Because he's the worst president, and he's a fascist, and he's a dictator, and on and on and on. But he's not the president now. Joe Biden is the president now, allegedly better than Donald Trump, allegedly the person who's defending democracy, and without whom we'll have fascism. But Biden, as in other ways, is following Donald Trump in prosecuting Julian Assange. So I ask again, are Democrats so much better? No. These efforts
or worse
are bipartisan. War is bipartisan. Support for Israel is bipartisan. Support for continuing the war in Ukraine is bipartisan. And that is why they hate Julian Assange, because he reveals all of these things to us. They don't want us to know. And when I say they, I mean the state. I mean their friends in corporate media who at one point would work with Assange, but when they were told to stop and turn on him, that's exactly what they did. Now, he barely gets a mention, even as he's fighting against extradition to the U.S. And I want to say something else about Assange, just very briefly. He was never charged with rape. He was never charged. The Swedes never charged him. The U.S. and the U.K. told them not to move the case along, not to free him, not to drop the charges, to keep him from having freedom of movement. Because he tells us what they do. He tells us what governments do. The WikiLeaks cables, that video footage from Iraq, showing the murder of a journalist. And that makes the silence of journalists all the more disgraceful. That Reuters journalists were killed by the United States in Iraq, that there was video evidence, and now you can't pay so-called journalists enough money to tell us, to show any solidarity with one of their colleagues. They do what the state tells them to do. And that is why you hear so little about Assange now. And that's why it's so important for all of us to be here today, so that we don't allow him to be disappeared worse than he already has been, disappeared into Belmarsh prison. And I want to say what awaits him should the UK do. It's not clear what the US wants, if they want him to just stay in jail forever or if they want to bring him here. But he would end up in the Eastern District of Virginia, where he was indicted. That is a hanging court. No one is acquitted. Everyone's convicted. And the penalties are harsh. The sentences are draconian. The U.S. has the most draconian sentences of any country in the world, by the way. Of course, it's the biggest jailer in the world. That's not surprising. So he cannot get a fair shake here. So we must mobilize to keep Julian Assange from being extradited to the U.S. and to free him from Belmarsh prison. He is a political prisoner. And all decent people who believe in peace, who believe in freedom of the press, who truly believe in democracy, must fight to free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange and power to the people. Thank you.
Free Julian Assange.
That's a very good talk,
Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange.
Okay, let's hear it again from Margaret Kimbery.